Our goal was to create a peaceful and wholesome game to unwind with during turbulent times.
Hi there. Welcome to the video. What I'm trying to talk about today is actually pretty simple and straightforward, so I'm going to try to do my best to keep this concise and just get straight to the point. So what I'm doing today is pitching a name for what I see as an emerging subgenre of video game. I want to talk about some of the games I think belong to this new category, where they came from or like what they evolved out of, what their core tenets are, like what helps define this subgenre, and why I dig it, why I enjoy playing these games, because that's sort of the weird thing here is that across the board, I enjoy all of them. Okay, so the name that I'm pitching for this subgenre is garden boxes. I want this term to evoke small enclosed spaces and the act of planting seeds, not literal seeds, but just in general starting something and watching it develop and grow over time, which I think is kind of the essence of gardening. Representative games for this subgenre: Islanders, Townscaper, Dorfromantik, Pile Up, Gourdlets, Terra Nil, and Station to Station. So basically, these games have a ton of aesthetic similarities that I think are worth pointing out, and it's probably those aesthetic similarities that brought my attention to the possibility of this being a subgenre in the first place. And as far as I know, this is not a subgenre that has been well defined so far, so who knows, maybe this can open up a bit of a discussion and other people can pitch their much better names for the category. Tons of aesthetic similarities. Most of them take place in like a void, maybe like a gradient, monochromatic background. You're just kind of floating in space. There's no real like story or context for what you're doing. It's very much focused on the gameplay. As for sort of the game area itself, it's either represented as like a floating plane or a cube, or you just have the implication of a small enclosed space. All of these games, all of these garden box games have a huge emphasis on aesthetic value overall, like the art direction for each one, even though there isn't like a single approach to art direction shared by all of these games. Each of them has their own distinct look. They all look fantastic. And that art direction very much extends to animations. Another massive aesthetic similarity that, I don't know, maybe someone will argue this with me, but I think it's sort of a sensation produced by the aesthetics of these games. They create the sensation of looking down on like a tiny little diorama. Does that make sense? Like they give you the impression that you're looking at a little miniature of a world, a little toy version of a world almost, as opposed to a super realistic world that you have created in the game. Like there's a self-awareness there, and also I think a keen understanding for the inherent appeal of looking at little dioramas and models, as well as building them, constructing them yourself, and getting that satisfaction of the sense of creation. And that leads right into the gameplay similarities, or the similarities in like objectives, how you interact with these games and these game worlds. So while the games that I listed off earlier have objectives unto themselves and they have different types of game worlds, there is a consistent sense of working with limited resources and working within that very small, enclosed, and limited physical space. Very often the objectives are leading you to build and interact with the world in some way. So just as a quick example, Dorfromantik is sort of kind of a board game. They have in fact since created a tabletop board game version, but basically you have these little cards and there's sections of landscape, and then you lay them down in specific positions to complete little quests that are like, you have to have a forest of 100 contiguous trees, you have to have a town, a connected portion of buildings with at least 150 buildings, things like that.
In Dorfromantik, you build vast landscapes out of hexagonal tiles. Rotate them to fit to their neighbors.
And if you do good, you get more pieces of world, pieces of landscape to build with. Something like Station to Station, which currently only has a demo, we haven't gotten the full release yet, just gives you buildings. It sets down buildings in different parts of the game world, and you connect them with railroad stations and railroad tracks in either logical or illogical ways, and you get to enjoy the visual feast of what that world becomes following your intervention, your involvement with building this world. The gameplay of Garden Boxes is so closely tied to the aesthetics because, again, strong art direction throughout, and you just get the sensation, especially in the more recent releases among this bunch, that they really know how good the game looks, and they really give you opportunities to just enjoy what you have created. Plenty of these games include some sort of photo mode. Some of them include customizable lighting so that you can change the look. They become weirdly immersive, even though, as I mentioned earlier, there's a sense of, oh, it's a miniature space, it's this tiny little unrealistic world. It's still a very pleasant world to inhabit most of the time. And going back to the concept of garden boxes, the garden part of that phrase comes from the fact that, yes, it is expanding. You are participating in helping this thing to grow, whether it's a town, whether it's a landscape that you're revitalizing. It scratches that itch for me of not only engaging in a creative act, but also just sitting back and enjoying it. And I think that's part of gardening as well. You have the work over here, which is satisfying in its own way, and that's what brings about the lovely garden you've been working towards. But once it's there, like once it's been manifested, there's plenty of enjoyment to be gained just from sitting there. And that is 100% something that I feel while playing garden box games. Okay, so where do these games come from? Why do I feel that it's like a whole new subgenre? And obviously it has its heritage. Like, this isn't something that came completely out of nowhere. I think that these games come from city builders and management sims, and I wish I could just pick one genre or the other for the sake of simplicity, but unfortunately they're very tangled, especially in how I'm viewing them as sort of the predecessors of garden boxes. Going back to some of my personal favorites in those genres from back in the day, the old SimCity games, the original Zoo Tycoon game, which remains one of my all-time favorites. Roller Coaster Tycoon games, of course, definitely fall in the same category. It has all of the elements that I've been describing in reference to garden boxes. Like, those things are there. The creative act is there. The emphasis on aesthetics is there, even if it's not meant to be the primary focus of the games. It's definitely present. Those are great-looking games for their era. That's what I realized myself as well, way back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was playing those games for hours on end, was like, yeah, I do enjoy like the management portion and like optimizing the pricing of whatever I'm building and all that kind of stuff. For SimCity, making all the different systems work together is very satisfying, but it wasn't my favorite part. It wasn't the thing that I connected the most with. What I connected the most with was building stuff. It was the creative, personalized, unique element of playing the games, which is always why I defaulted to a sandbox mode. If there was a sandbox mode available, as there was in Zoo Tycoon in particular, I was on board. I was completely there. That's what I wanted to do. And to this day, when I open up that game, that's it. That's it. Unlimited money, whatever cheat codes I want, and I just build a park that I think looks nice. Other games, the contemporary games in those genres, have focused on other areas, and that's totally fine. The biggest example that comes to mind is the upcoming release Cities Skylines 2, which just had a trailer the other day, and even the trailer emphasized like the unique and personal element of a city builder. You have the same tools as every other player interacting with the game, but what you make is going to be different. Like the city you create and the city that collapses in horrible misery is kind of unique to you. Like, you had that experience. It's based on your choices specifically. That's very much present in Garden Box games. But that's not the be-all end-all of City Skylines. They have all these incredibly complex interacting systems. They try to be realistic with their visuals and how they represent public transportation and just logistics in general, zoning, all that stuff. This is where garden boxes diverge. They are one branch of the management sim / city builder family tree. The realistic sims went off in that direction, and the garden boxes went over here, and they said, okay, we're going to strip back the visuals. We're going to strip back the systems. Like, there's still complexity and strategy to be had in garden box games, but it's not the be all end all. It's more of a nice to have. And we're going to focus on making these pretty to look at, fun to be in, and straightforward. Like, I think even some of these games describe themselves as a minimalist, and I think that's another really useful term for defining the whole genre. This is just what I'm into. And this has brought about the weird phenomenon where every single garden box game that I have come into contact with and that I've said, yeah, I think this belongs to this category I've just made up in my head, I love it. Like, I lose a bunch of time to it. Even just the demos for the new ones, I'm like, oh yeah, it clicks. I'm here, I'm going to buy the game when it comes out, and I'm going to spend dozens of hours with it. That is not something that happens with other genres of video games. Character action games, Souls-likes, puzzle games, whatever, totally hit or miss. Love one of them, hate the next one. I have to hope for the best when I start a new game in that genre. With garden boxes, no. At least so far, I don't know. Maybe just because it's a relatively small subgenre at this point in time. Maybe it's because I'm incorrectly grouping these games together and you don't feel that they're all that closely related. I don't know. But I see the connections, and in a weird way, it just feels tailored to what I like. I feel kind of spoiled for choice that there have been so many of these games within just the past few years. Another like side note of similarities between garden boxes that I've noticed thus far, it seems that almost all of them come from devs in Europe. I have no idea why that's a bit of connective tissue here. Maybe a sensibility thing, maybe a love of like infrastructure and aesthetics. I have no idea. Feel free to discuss. But most of what I wanted to do here is just point to this. I just wanted to point to this and say, I think something is happening here, and you can hate my name for it, whatever. But if the concept of these games and the concept of their connective tissue speaks to you, for one, definitely try out the games. They'll probably be a good fit if you've watched this far into the video. And beyond that, yeah, it's just something to be aware of. It can be hard sometimes to note the evolution of entire mediums. And I think this is a case where, yeah, it's a small evolution. It's a small little development that could very well become a much larger subgenre in the future. I'm not going to predict where it's going to go, but I'm very happy to see where it is right now. That's all for now. Thanks for stopping by.